What if everything you thought you understood about what you own is wrong? Not wrong in a small way, wrong in the way that changes what you do next, how long you hold, and how clearly you see what is being built around you. Most XRP holders think they own a coin, a digital token, a line in the blockchain, something that goes up, something that goes down, something you check 3 times a day and try not to feel too much about. But this week, the head of innovation at Franklin Templeton, an institution managing nearly $2 trillion in assets, said something on camera that reframes every single one of those habits. She said, "When you own a cryptocurrency, you do not own a share of a company. You own part of the network. And if that network becomes the settlement layer for the new global financial system, then what you actually own is a piece of the infrastructure that all of it runs on." Then, let's map exactly what that means for where XRP stands right now. Welcome back to XRP News Flow Signals, where we track the structural signals that reframe how you see what you hold. This is not financial advice. Do your own research. But if you want to understand why the Franklin Templeton framing is the most important thing said about XRP this week, and how it connects to everything else happening right now, let's get into it precisely. Let's start with the hard truth that changes the way you should be reading every piece of XRP news from this point forward. Most retail investors evaluate crypto assets the way they evaluate stocks. They look at price. They look at market cap. They look at volume. They ask, is this going up or is this going down? That framework is not wrong. It is just incomplete. And for XRP specifically, it is dangerously incomplete. Because what Franklin Templeton's head of innovation said on camera this week is not a marketing statement. It is a structural reclassification delivered by a $1.7 trillion asset manager who has already committed capital to this space. Her exact framing: if you buy shares in a company, the assets belong to the company. But if you buy tokens of a blockchain, you own part of the network. The network itself, not a claim on the network's revenue, not a derivative of the network's performance, part of the network. Now apply that framework to XRP specifically, and apply it to what is being built on the XRP Ledger right now. Ripple leadership is in Japan this week for a summit where the XRP Ledger community is presenting critical updates on real-world asset tokenization. Not potential tokenization, not theoretical use cases. Active, documented, institutional-grade tokenization of real-world assets running on the XRP Ledger, in front of the financial institutions that will deploy it. BlackRock is talking about tokenization. JP Morgan is talking about tokenization. Goldman Sachs is talking about tokenization. And the common thread in every institutional conversation about the future of finance is the same word: bringing real-world value onto chain rails. The XRP Ledger is those rails. And if you own XRP, if you have held through the drawdowns, through the red months, through the noise, you do not own a speculative bet on a price chart. You own a portion of the infrastructure that all of that tokenized value will settle across. Think about what that means when $13 trillion in real-world assets begins migrating on-chain. Think about what it means when cross-border payments worth $150 trillion annually begin routing through settlement rails that settle in 4 seconds at fractions of a cent. The value does not go to a corporation. It flows through the network, and you own part of the network. That is the reframe. And once you see it, the price at $1.32 looks like something entirely different than it did 5 minutes ago. Now let's run the numbers, because the network ownership framing only becomes actionable when you connect it to the specific scale of what is being built on top of it. Start with the Gemini data point that hit this week. Gemini's SEC filing confirmed a $250 million credit facility from Ripple, structured with a contractual requirement that Gemini actively hold and use RLUSD on the XRP Ledger, or face financial penalties. This is the same mechanism we documented in previous breakdowns. Not optional adoption, not aspirational partnership, but legally binding, penalty-backed, contractually enforced network usage. Every time Gemini activates that mandate, every settlement cycle, every RLUSD flow required to stay within contract terms, volume moves through the XRP ledger. Volume generates fees. Fees burn XRP permanently from a fixed 100 billion token supply that will never increase. Now scale that one contract across the institutional pipeline being built. Franklin Templeton has tokenized a money market fund on XRP Ledger and holds an XRP spot ETF. They are not experimenting. They have built a product dependency. Arizona has passed legislation creating a digital asset strategic reserve fund that includes XRP. Not Bitcoin only, XRP specifically. State governments are beginning to classify XRP as a reserve-grade asset, the same classification framework that determines what sovereign wealth flows are permitted to hold. Glassnode data shows that over 50% of XRP's circulating supply is currently sitting in unrealized loss, meaning the majority of retail holders are underwater at current prices. In every major asset repricing cycle in financial history, the moment institutional capital enters a market where retail supply is predominantly in unrealized loss, the supply that would otherwise create selling pressure does not materialize. Holders do not sell at a loss. And when new institutional demand enters a market where supply is locked by underwater holders who will not sell, the math of price discovery changes. Now add the Charles Hoskinson analysis, delivered publicly, not as a prediction, but as a structural market observation from the CEO of a competing blockchain. His argument: Bitcoin's value is maintained entirely by collective belief in its size. The moment another asset flips its market cap, the belief system loses its anchor. The assets that have Bitcoin's deflationary properties, plus real utility, settlement, tokenization, cross-border payments, extract Bitcoin's value systematically. XRP was built to do exactly that from day one, not as a competitor to Bitcoin's narrative, as the solution to Bitcoin's limitations. And the institutions tokenizing the world are not building on Bitcoin's rails. Let's talk about the Japan summit, because the timing and the participants tell you exactly where we are in the deployment cycle. Ripple leadership arriving in Japan this week is not a public relations event. It is a technical and regulatory coordination meeting where the XRP Ledger community is presenting updates on real-world asset tokenization to the financial institutions that are evaluating how to deploy it. Japan is not a peripheral market for this thesis. Japan's revised Payment Services Act, already in force, created a defined legal lane for licensed stablecoin issuance and distribution. SBI VC Trade already holds an MOU with Ripple specifically to distribute RLUSD under that framework. The legal infrastructure is not being built. It is already built. What is being calibrated now is the operational deployment, and RLUSD's role in that deployment is no longer theoretical. The Gemini contract proves that RLUSD has already achieved the level of institutional credibility required to be written into a $250 million credit facility as a contractual performance metric. That is a very different status than emerging stablecoin. Now connect the Arizona Strategic Reserve development to the global picture. Arizona is the first U.S. state to formally include XRP in a digital asset strategic reserve fund. But the institutional logic that drove that decision, XRP's utility for value transfer, its regulatory clarity post-SEC commodity classification, its fixed supply and deflationary burn mechanics, is not unique to Arizona. Every state treasury department evaluating digital asset reserves will run the same analysis. Every sovereign wealth fund evaluating blockchain-based settlement infrastructure will run the same analysis. Every central bank exploring on-demand liquidity for cross-border flows will run the same analysis. The analysis points in the same direction each time. And here is the signal that cuts through everything. Franklin Templeton does not use the word infrastructure casually. In a $1.7 trillion asset management operation, the word infrastructure has a precise meaning. It means a dependency. It means something you build around, not something you trade in and out of. It means something that must function for your other systems to function. When a $2 trillion institution classifies the XRP Ledger as infrastructure, they are telling you how they have categorized it internally. And internal categorization drives capital allocation in ways that no public announcement ever fully captures. I want to pause here for a moment, because the Franklin Templeton framing, the Gemini contract, the Japan summit, and the Arizona Reserve all point at the same thing from 4 different directions. And assembling that picture from primary sources, from filings, from executive statements, from legislative records, rather than from price charts and social media threads, is exactly what this channel is built to do. If that is the signal layer you have been missing, subscribe to XRP News Flow Signals right now and turn on notifications. Because the Japan Summit updates are going to produce specific tokenization announcements in the next few days. And when they land, you will want the analytical context already in place, not assembled after the fact when the price has already moved. Let's be precise about what is converging on a visible timeline, because the next 60 to 90 days are stacked with specific, datable triggers. Catalyst 1. Japan Summit tokenization announcements. Ripple leadership is on the ground in Japan right now. The XRP Ledger community is presenting RWA tokenization updates to institutions that already have the legal framework to deploy. Announcements from this summit will not be vague partnership language. They will be operational specifics, corridors, timelines, asset classes. Watch for them this week. Catalyst 2. RLUSD Japan distribution launch. SBI VC Trade holds a live MOU for RLUSD distribution under Japan's Payment Services Act. The legal lane is open. The distribution infrastructure exists through SBI's banking network. When the launch date is confirmed, XRP Ledger's on-chain volume data changes in real time, visibly, measurably, and publicly. Catalyst 3. Clarity Act legislative passage. Confirmed as a done deal among key stakeholders. Senate passage converts institutional intent into institutional permission. The compliance barrier that has kept the most conservative allocators on the sidelines disappears with statutory language, not interpretive guidance. Catalyst 4. State strategic reserve expansion. Arizona is the first. The institutional logic driving that decision is replicable in every state treasury running the same analysis. As XRP's strategic reserve classification spreads through state legislation, the sovereign demand floor underneath the asset expands structurally, independent of retail sentiment. 4 catalysts, all on a visible timeline, none requiring speculation about technology that does not yet exist. Here is the supply picture that makes the catalyst timeline structurally significant. Over 50% of XRP's circulating supply is currently an unrealized loss. Holders who are underwater do not sell, they hold. And the supply that would otherwise be available to meet institutional demand stays locked. When institutional capital enters a market where available liquid supply has already been absorbed by long-term holders who will not sell at current prices, the price discovery event does not happen gradually. It happens at the velocity of new demand meeting constrained supply. The network is being built. The demand is forming behind institutional gates. The supply is locked by holders who understand what they own. Franklin Templeton told you what you own. The rest follows. Let me leave you with the frame that ties everything together. You own part of a network that Franklin Templeton calls infrastructure, that Arizona is classifying as a strategic reserve asset, that Gemini has contractually committed to using under penalty of financial consequence, that Ripple leadership is in Japan right now presenting to the institutions who will deploy it at scale. Every tokenized real estate transaction that settles on XRP Ledger, every cross-border remittance that routes through on-demand liquidity, every RLUSD settlement that flows through a Gemini credit card program, every RWA that migrates from legacy rails onto 4-second settlement infrastructure. All of it flows through the network you own part of. The price at $1.32 does not reflect that ownership. It reflects the lag between what institutions have already documented and what the market has priced. That lag is the signal. If this reframe changed how you see what you hold, subscribe to XRP News Flow Signals before the Japan Summit announcements drop. The tokenization updates coming out of that summit this week are going to be specific, and you want the map already built before the headlines arrive. Drop one word below: network, if this reframe landed for you. Coin, if you are still thinking about it. Let's see where this community stands. Stay sharp. The signal does not lie. Not financial advice. Always conduct your own research.